Okay, now that we've implemented our questions class, we're done with this. Now we're going to implement the test class. Okay, these are all the attributes within the test class, and these are the three methods that we have to implement, right? And besides these three methods, obviously, one method that we have to implement is the constructor for this class, right? So we're going to have to implement the constructor for this class. Okay, here's our solution. This is the definition of the test class, right? And these are all the attributes that we are using. What you should notice is that all the attributes within this class have been declared as private, and this line here where we've declared this array which is going to hold objects of this data type question, right? This is where we have implemented containment, right? So this class is where we have implemented containment, right? This should be containment. Okay, so let's take a look at the constructor. Which attributes are being initialized in the constructor? When the constructor is going to be called, we are going to initialize the test ID. We are also going to assign initial value to number of questions in the test, right? And we are also going to initialize value to date set in the test, and this attribute level is also going to be assigned an initial value when the constructor is going to be called. So all of these attributes, there are 4 attributes here which we are going to assign value within the constructor. So we are going to assign test ID a value within the constructor. We are going to assign number of questions a value within the constructor, right? We are going to assign date set a value within the constructor, right? And then we are going to assign this attribute level a value within the constructor. Okay, the only is so three of these attributes have been assigned values through parameters that are being passed. For example, 1, 2 and 3. These are the 3 parameters that we are passing to this constructor, and the value of ID is being assigned to test ID. The value of numQ is being assigned to number of questions. The value of LVL is being assigned to the level, right? So these 3 have been passed as parameters, right? And the values of those parameters have been assigned to our attributes, right, as you can see here. But date set, this particular attribute has been assigned a value using today, which is a built-in function, So the moment this constructor is going to be called, this is the first thing that's going to execute, then this is the second one that's going to get executed, then on this third line the right hand side contains this built-in function today. What this function is going to do is it is going to return the present value, the current value of the date, and that value is then going to be assigned to date set. So that's how our date is going to be assigned to this attribute date set, right? So we're using a built-in function. So out of the 4 assignments to attributes that we've done within the constructor, this date set has been assigned using the built-in function today. All the other attributes, test ID, number of question and level, have been assigned through passing parameters to the constructor. Okay, notice one thing that we've done within the constructor. One thing we've done within the constructor is that we have called this method within the constructor. So we've called this method design test within the constructor. Okay, so so what this is going to do is first this statement or this instruction within the constructor is going to get executed, then the second one is going to get executed, then the third one is going to get executed, then the fourth one is going to get executed, and then this fifth one is going to be executed. When this instruction is executed, this is basically placing a call to this function, public sub design test. So our control is going to be transferred from the constructor to this procedure that we've written. I have not expanded this procedure, so I'm just going to expand this procedure and show you what code is written inside public sub design test. Okay, so this is what the design test procedure looks like. This is what this subroutine looks like. What I've done here is I've declared a few variables that I'm going to be using within this procedure. So right at the front, right at the top, what I've done is I've declared these few variables that I'm going to be using in this procedure, and then I am running a loop. Okay, so I'm running a loop after that, and I'm going to run this loop from 0 to the total number of questions in the test, right? And remember, this value, number of questions, was just got initialized in our constructor, right? Number of questions was initialized in our constructor. So our loop is going to run from 0 to number of questions minus 1 times. So if we have 3 questions, this loop is going to run from, this is going to effectively become what? For I is equal to 0 to 3 minus 1, right? If we have the total number of questions, if they are 3, number of questions are 3, then this statement becomes what? For I is equal to 0 to 3 minus 1, which basically means I is equal to 2, right? So the first time the loop runs, I is going to have a value of 0. The next time the loop runs, I will have a value of 1. The next time the loop runs, I will have a value of 2. So this is the last time that this loop is going to run, because the final value for I is 2. So this loop effectively runs 3 times. Once when I is 0, then when I is 1, and then the third time when I is equal to 2. So we've set up this loop. This is going to run 3 times if number of questions equals 3, right? So this loop is going to run depending on the number of questions given in the test, right? And what have we done inside the loop? First, we have set up our question ID. Question ID equals I plus 1. So when the loop runs the first time, the value of I is equal to 0. At this point in time, our question ID will be equal to 1, right? Because this is the first question. First time the loop is running, we are going to set up the first question. That's why QID has been set to I plus 1. 0 plus 1 would be 1. So the first time the loop runs, QID equals 1. Then we have shown an output statement. We are asking the user to type in the question topic, right? So the user is going to type in the question topic on this line, and then what we've done is we've called our constructor for the questions class, right? This is where we are calling the constructor. This new so we are using new question, and we are passing 2 parameters to it. We are passing question ID and the topic that we just got from the user, right? So we're passing 2 parameters to it, and if we take a look at the constructor that we had defined in the questions class, then you can take a look here that this is the constructor, right, that we declared, and within this constructor we are taking 2 parameters. This is the first parameter that we are taking, and then this is the second parameter that we are taking, right? So this was our constructors class, right? Sorry, this was the constructor in our question class. So that is exactly what we are doing within that is exactly what we are doing right here, right? This is exactly what we are doing. When we are calling the constructor, we are passing it 2 parameters, right? And so this instance is going to be created. This instance is going to be created. This object is going to be created because we are calling the constructor. And remember, what we are doing here is that we are, let me clear up some space first. Okay, so what we're doing here basically is that we've declared so this is our array, right? This on the left hand side, this is our array, right? When I equals 0, what we are saying is question 0, right? So the name of our array is questions. So we have an array with a total of 10 boxes, right? Here we have an array with a total of 10 boxes where the starting box is 0 and the upper bound of this array is 9. So the starting element is 0 and the final element is element number 9, right? So what we are doing is we are entering value into this element, question 0, right? And basically what is being done here is for question 0, for this particular element, a new object of this questions class is being created using the constructor, and within that object and within the constructor we are passing two parameters, QID and topic, right? QID was set to the value of I plus 1 and topic was taken from the user, right? So the user typed in the value of what topic was, and so the constructor is being called, right? Okay, once we've called the constructor and this object has been created, right? Then what we are doing is we are getting further, what we are doing is we are taking values of all the remaining attributes from the user. For example, each question has marks, right? So this is what we are saying in this line, enter marks for this question, and then we are taking the input from the user to store whatever, the number of marks for this question are going to be, right? So that value is being stored into this variable marks. And what we are also doing here is that we are using another variable called total marks. See, this loop is going to run, let's say, 3 times. If we have 3 questions, this loop is going to run 3 times. Each time this loop runs, the user enters marks for a single question. What we are doing is we are adding those marks for a single question to our total marks. Why we are doing this is because one of the attributes in the test class is the maximum, is the total number of marks that we are going to store for the test, right? So if a test has 3 questions, what are the total marks for the test? For example, the total marks of the test could be 6, right? If we have 3 questions, and if we have 5 questions, the total marks of the test may be 12. It all depends on how many marks each question has, right? So we are taking marks of each question from the user. Once the marks for each question are provided, we are going to total those marks up to find how many total marks are going to be there for the test, right? So here's what happens. For each time the loop runs, we take marks for a certain question, and then those marks for a single question are added to our total marks. So when this loop stops running, that is when we'll have the total marks for the entire test, because by that time marks of each question would have been entered and each question's marks would have been added to our total. So if we had 3 questions, marks of all 3 questions would have been added to our total when this loop stops running, and finally we are going to assign these total marks to our attribute max marks. Remember, max marks is an attribute of the test class, right? So max marks is an attribute of our test class. So it is when we are going to call this design test function. So within this design test function, we are going to be finally assigning values to max marks, which are going to be basically the total marks of a particular test, right? So alright, so now that we have totaled our marks, right, we are asking the user to input the question statement, and once the user inputs the question statement, we are saving that up in this variable qtext, right? And then we are asking the user to type in the answer statement. So we are taking input from the user for the answer statement and we are storing it in this variable answer, right? And finally what we are doing is we are calling the set question method, right? So when this gets called and I is equal to 0, right, this is the first time this loop is running, so this becomes what? Questions 0 dot set questions, right? So now we are calling the set questions method and we are passing the following parameters: qtext, answer and marks, right? So these are the 3 parameters that we are passing, and we are doing this for the object that is stored in the 0th element of this array, right? So the questions object that was stored in the 0th element of this array, this is where we initialized it, and this is where we are calling the set question method within our loop, right? So this loop is running for I is equal to 0 right now. So within this loop, first we initialized using our constructor, and then we are calling the set question method to set up our test, right? So if you can count here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So what we've done is, in the constructor we passed two parameters. So these were passed to assign values to two of the attributes within the question class, right? So two of the attributes, and here we are calling the set question method to pass parameters to assign values to the remaining three attributes within the questions class. If I can show you the questions class quickly, within the questions class, as you can see here, we have 5 parameters, right? These 5 parameters, and two of these got initialized within the constructor, right? The question ID as well as the topic got initialized within the constructor, and the remaining 3 parameters are being initialized within this set question method. So the set question method is where the remaining 3 parameters, answer, question text and marks, are getting initialized. And as you can see that the set question method or the procedure is taking what? It is taking 3 parameters, q text, answer and marks. So it is expecting 3 parameters, and that is exactly what we are doing when we are placing a call to this, subroutine or this procedure. That is exactly what we are doing. So from within our loop, when we are placing a call to set question, we are passing 3 parameters, right? Just like we are supposed to, right? And for the values of these 3 parameters, q text, answer and marks, have been taken from the user on these lines respectively, right? So we've taken input from the user for each of these, right? And then we have called this set question method. So this loop is going to run, a few times, and each time this loop is going to run, we are going to be moving to the next element within the array. Remember, this is an array, right? Questions is our array, right? So we are going to be moving to the next element within the array. Previously we were at element 0, but when I becomes equals to 1, when I is equal to 1, then we'll be moving to this element, and it is for this element now we'll be creating a new object, right? Calling the constructor here when I is equal to 1. So the constructor will be called and an object will be created that is going to be stored in this location now, because I is equal to 1 right now. And also, when this set questions method is going to be called, that is going to be called for the object that is lying in this element, right? In this element, within this element. So each time the loop runs, we are calling our constructor and we are also calling the set questions method, right? And so the first time the loop runs, when I is equal to 0, the 0th question, the first question is going to be set up, right? When the loop runs the second time, the second question is going to be set up. When the loop runs the third time, the third question is going to be set up. And each time the loop runs, these are the two methods that are being called, the constructor, right, and the set questions method. So each time the loop runs, these are the two methods that are being called, and through these two methods we are assigning all the attributes within the question class. We are assigning them their values by passing parameters, first through the constructor and then through the set questions class. I hope you understand how design test is working. Okay, so we have implemented design test, right? Let's take a look at what kind of code should be written inside the print test class. This time we are trying to print the tests, right? We are trying to print the entire test but not the answers, remember. So we are going to be printing all the questions within the test, right? And we are also going to be printing the question ID and the question statement, the question topic, but we are not going to be printing the answers in the print test method. For printing the answers, we have a separate method called print answers. So let's take a look at what the code for the print test method is. Okay, so here is our solution for the print test method. Within the print test method, what we are doing is that we have to print our test, right? So what we are doing is that we are printing values for these attributes, right? So we are printing the test ID. We're printing the test ID. Remember, this print test method is part of the test class, right? So because we are inside the test class, we are printing the test ID. From inside the test class, we can easily access our attribute, right? So we are inside the test class, and inside the test class, this method print test has been written. So we are using the console.writeLine statement to print our test ID. Once we've printed our test ID, we are going to use the console.writeLine statement to print the total number of marks of the test. And once we've printed the total number of marks for the test, we are going to use console.writeLine to print the level of the test. Remember, the level of the test could be A, S or G, right? So this was what the specification provided. This was what information was provided in the write-up for this task, right? So this is where we are going to print the level, right? And then we are going to print the date on which this test was set. So we are printing all information about the test, right? And besides that, we have to print, all the questions within the test. Because there are multiple questions within the test, that's why we've written a loop. And because all the questions were stored in the array, right? We had a questions array, right? This was where we had stored all the questions, right? So here's what we are doing. What we are doing is we are running this loop, right? So this loop is going to run many times, and each time this loop runs, we are going to print the ID of the question. So when I will be equal to 0, we will be printing all the information that is stored in the 0th element of this array, right? So all the information about the question that is stored in the 0th element of this array will be printing the question ID. Then we will be printing the question topic, and you can take a look here. We are calling the get topic function that has been written in the questions class, right? Then we are printing the marks of the question, which is basically the marks of a single question, right? And we are using the get marks function that was written inside the questions class. And finally, what we are doing is we are printing the question statement by calling the get question method that was written in the questions class, right? So this loop is going to run multiple times, and the value of I is going to keep changing, and each time we are going to be moving to the next element, and we'll be printing the test. We'll be printing the question ID, the question topic, the question mark, and the question statement for each one of these elements, right? So I hope you've understood how print test works. Okay, so now that we've covered print test, right, let's take a look at what the code for print answers should look like. This is the final method in our class. So let's take a look at what the code for print answers is going to look like, and just remember, this is only going to be printing answers for a test. So we'll need to print information about the test, like the test ID, like the level of the test, right, the maximum marks in the test, and the date set, right? And besides that, we'll also be printing answers for each question. So this is where we only have to print the answer statement for each question. We don't have to print the question statement for each question. So we have to print the answer statement for each question and not the question statement for each question. Okay, and this is what a solution to print test looks like. Print answers looks like. So this is the implementation of this procedure, print answers. What we've done here is we've printed all the information about the test ID, the maximum marks, the level, and the date on which this question was set. And then we are running a loop once again to run through our array, and we will be printing the question ID, the question topic, the marks of the question, and finally we'll be printing the answer statements, right? And we're going to be printing the answer statement by calling this function, get answer, which is part of our questions class. So this function has been implemented in our questions class, and we are calling this function to print the answers. So that completes our definition for the test class.